racists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon, Jay. How are you doing this Friday, November 10th?
I'm doing about as well as like Dick Cheney in boat shoes. How about that?
Okay. Well, that's a new one.
That's how I describe myself now.
I didn't even expect that one. I like it. And I get the reference. We'll talk about that later. I'm actually doing fantastic because today is one of the most important days in my year.
I should have opened the show by wishing you a special day.
That's right. It is.
Please go ahead.
It is the Marine Corps birthday, number 248, 10 November 1775 in Tun Tavern, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My Marine Corps was founded, and I am always very happy to mention that. And Jay, I know you're a fan of Latin, and so I think you'll appreciate the video that the Corps released marking the day. It opened with the phrase, let's see if I get the pronunciation right, Civis pacem parabellum.
If we show force, we'll have peace.
You're pretty clear. Yeah. If you desire peace, prepare for war. Yeah.
Prepare for war. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So yeah, that's, like I said, big day in my personal calendar. And of course, it's followed by another big day tomorrow on the 11th, when I know a lot of our listeners will be checking out the show. That's not only Veterans Day, but also lesser known, maybe you've heard of this one, Jay, Singles Day. Are you familiar with Singles Day?
I'm not familiar with Singles Day.
11/11, Singles Day. It was this sort of unofficial holiday that some folks in China came up with in the early 90s to a way for kind of single people to, I don't know, celebrate or try to forget about their singleness by buying themselves something or getting together with other, I guess, single or not single people. But it has become the single biggest shopping day in the world.
How about that?
Because there are a lot of people in
China.
China.
Like an anti-Valentine's Day type thing.
Nothing like that. But anyway, so happy Marine Corps birthday, Veterans Day, Singles Day, whatever. But whatever the day is, we have a lot we want to get to. We want to talk about Joe Manchin's retirement and possible third-party run and what that might mean. The recent elections this last week, particularly in Kentucky, Ohio, and Virginia. That New York Times Siena College poll that has Biden trailing in 5 of the 6 key swing states. The Republican presidential debate, the censure of Representative Tlaib, the important case, I would argue, about the Second Amendment, United States versus Rahimi. Well, there's no way we'll get to all that on the regular show, but we'll fit in what we can here, and the rest we'll get into our midweek supporters show. But before we get to any of that, over the last few weeks, a number of listeners have gotten in touch and told me that they're disappointed and frustrated. Now, normally, Jay, when listeners are disappointed and frustrated, it's with you. And
I was going to say, my name usually comes right after those words.
And I get that, I share that, but this time it's with me. And they're disappointed and frustrated with me, well, for not calling out you and May when they feel like you're saying things that are misleading or incorrect. So I'm falling down the job. No. They don't really expect anything more of you guys, but they kind of expect
right. They just expect you to be, understood.
And I've given it some thought because when I get student evaluations, which I've gotten for years, I always say if I hear one comment from one student, I kind of ignore it. But if I start hearing multiple comments from different students, I think, well, maybe there's something here. And so I gave this some thought. And I believe that this does happen. And I think it happens for one of 3 reasons. Number one.
All right, we got a list.
Yeah, it is a list. Okay, a list of 3.
All right.
Number one, I don't think what you or May, what you're saying is misleading or incorrect. So I'm not going to call you out if I don't disagree with you. And that happens, okay. I'm
or not necessarily disagree. You can still disagree, but agree on the underlying fact.
Exactly. So secondly, there could be something that I mean to comment on, but the way we do the show is oftentimes a response will have 3, 4, or 5 points in there. And sometimes maybe I'll forget to bring something up in my response. So, and third, there can be instances where I'm just not familiar enough with a specific instance or fact that you or may bring up. And so I don't feel like I can call you out because I'm not sure if it's wrong. And, obviously I can't do anything about number one. If I don't disagree with you, I don't disagree. So there's nothing to call out. But for that second thing, I thought, well, I will do my best to try to take better notes when you're talking, when May's talking, so that I'm less likely to forget things that I want to bring up that I think might be off base. And if it's the third thing, if I'm just not familiar enough, but something doesn't seem quite right, I'll try my best to mention that and just say, well, I'll have to look into that. And
yeah, and we've done that lots of times before of like, hey, we'll look this up and get back to you.
Exactly. And I really appreciate constructive criticism. I mean, I want to do the best job I can. And so understanding where I may sometimes fall short, that helps me to get better. And I really do appreciate that. And so I love getting this sort of feedback. And if there's really ever anything you feel that I get wrong or Jay or May, any of our hosts gets wrong, we want to know about it, and we will do our best to respond, ideally on the show. And of course, specific critiques are the most helpful. For instance, last week, someone wrote in, your coverage of the Middle East was awful, something like that. You left
Jay,
so
you
much
suck.
out. Yeah, well, okay. That doesn't give us a lot
on the
to work
show.
with.
Yeah,
so if you can be specific, that helps because we really do want to be as fact and reality based as we can. If we get something wrong, we want to correct it. So thank you and keep the constructive criticisms coming. All right, moving on.
Yeah, actually, I can take or leave the constructive criticism.
It's just the hell with
if
the
you want to
constructive
direct them to
criticisms.
Mike,
Yeah.
By all means.
Well, I want them at least. So there you go. Okay. All right. So moving on. On Thursday, November 9th, West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin announced that he would not be running for re-election. Manchin's been in the Senate since 2011, and he was likely to lose to his Republican challenger, Jim Justice. But now what was a
big Jim Justice.
Big Jim Justice. Great name.
As President Trump refers to him.
Of course he does. Yeah. So
Big Jim.
Once you heard the name, the endorsement was bound to follow, I think, but now it was a likely Republican pickup. Now it's pretty much a guaranteed Republican pickup. And in making his announcement, Manchin said he would be traveling the country and speaking out to see if there's an interest in creating a movement to mobilize the middle and bring Americans together. And of course, for a while now, there's been speculation that Manchin, he might be enticed to run as the No Labels Party's candidate. And initially, I'll remind folks, the party said they would not run a candidate if they didn't believe there was a chance that candidate could win. I checked their strategy statement as of today, and it says they'll run only under the proper environmental conditions, which will be measured through regular polling and research. And that's, of course, a very different statement. I think you'll agree, Jay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at this point, No Labels, they have ballot access in 12 states, and there are 2 of those are battlegrounds, Arizona and Nevada. And honestly, I would be surprised, especially if Manchin is interested, if No Labels didn't find a way to conclude that those proper environmental conditions had been met. So, especially given the fact that they're planning on raising a ton of money, something like $70 million. And it just seems to me unlikely that they're just going to look at this and say, well, we're not going to do that. So, I guess, Jay, I want to get your sense first about what you think about Manchin's retirement. Then we can move on to the No Labels third party thing and how we think that might affect the race.
So on the retirement, I guess that's not super surprising, right? I think Manchin was looking at a tough race for re-election from Big Jim Justice. And he's in the unfortunate position of he's disillusioned a lot of the hardcore Democrats and Republicans. Well, they've got Big Jim Justice to vote for. So, I think he'd pick up some Republican votes, but it's one, West Virginia is a red state to begin with, so he's kind of swimming upstream to start. So I think that makes sense. There was talk for some time about him, maybe he would run for West Virginia governor or something, but I think that maybe prevents some of the same problems, not all the same problems, but some of them. So yeah, I think this is in politics, Mike. You'll get this, and some of our listeners of a certain age will. The game Donkey Kong, right? There's one level where you got to jump on the different like riser things that go up.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you don't jump off in time, like you die. And
I get you.
So you don't want to jump too soon. You want to jump to another riser that's going up. But you have to time it right. So that's what I often think this is, right? It's you've got to jump on the right time. You can't just keep riding the same lift where you get killed, or if you jump too soon, you just kind of fall to your death. So I think this is one of those Manchin was probably looking at. He'd had to jump pretty soon. So he did.
Yeah. And also I'll point out that, he's 76 years old and maybe he's just done at this point. I can see where he might just think, well, I've been at it for a long time. He'll be fine, and
the hell with all you guys. Yeah.
But what do you think? How about the third party run sort of thing? I mean, his statement, I think, more than left the door open, but I'm trying to figure out what Joe Manchin gets out of this. And I'm struggling a little bit because there's no way that a no labels candidate can win. And so there are some people, sort of very Machiavellian conspiracy theory people, who are saying this no labels has always been a closet MAGA sort of operation. Mother Jones found some information about some of the donors, and they concluded they were, a lot of conservatives who might be inclined to want to support Trump over Biden. This would be kind of a underhanded way of doing that. I don't know. What's your take on that?
No, I don't particularly buy that. If anything, most of the time, no labels type, and the no labels group has been around for a while. I shouldn't say a while, but what, 10 years probably?
So
predates Trump.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a fact. We can double check if I'm wrong, but I believe that it does. No, I don't think that that's the big conspiracy theory, and it's also, it wouldn't really make sense, given that what we'll talk about later. I mean, Trump could be within striking distance, right? So if you're going to spend money, well, just spend it on Trump, if that's your real plan. So, that just seems too complicated. Now, Manchin said he's going to go on sort of a listening tour, which I think is good, and sort of, he'll go and see who starts showing up and gauge the response and see what money starts coming in. I would have a little more optimistic view of his chances than you, not much. Because I would agree, one of the iron laws in politics is third parties always lose. But this is a weird year. I don't know if there's ever been a year where the two incumbents, I'll say two incumbents because they, both essentially are, have been so universally disliked.
Well, 2016 comes to mind.
What's that?
2016 comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I suppose. But even there, the difference there was neither one had been president. This one, you've got two people who have actually been president and now running against each other. And everyone knows sort of what they're getting, whereas they didn't before.
But I wonder.
My thought back in 2016 was that, and I was incorrect in this, was that so much of the Trumpian bravado and behavior was all just an act, and that's just kind of what he does for the press, and that he would grow in office. That turned out to not be the case. So,
yeah, I guess if people are looking for an alternative, I don't know that it's a 76-year-old white guy from West Virginia.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't spring to mind.
I think we're sort of limited to 70-something He would add a little bit of youth and vigor to the race,
Yeah, no
perhaps
kidding.
at 76.
Oh yeah, the relative spring
he would
chicken.
He
yeah.
would be the youngest candidate. Of those other two. So but I think it's worthwhile him doing this, right? And I'm trying to think of other.
You mean the listening tour, not
party-
necessarily running?
Yeah.
I guess,
The listening tour.
I mean,
let's see what happens, because there's a couple different things. One, right, when people are polled, I think there always is this tendency, and you could probably back me up with actual data, of people saying, I don't like either one of them, the hell with all of them, right? Sort of along the same lines of, how do you think Congress is doing? Well, it's always horrible, but, your guy's always doing pretty well. So I think there's that out there that, when push comes to shove, do you want Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Well, neither one, the hell with them. Do you want Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or well, that's
you know what I mean.
The question is actually put to you. Yeah,
that's a great point, because there was a Wall Street Journal analysis from today finding that a third party candidate or third option would pull more votes from Biden than Trump. But the way it's phrased is Donald Trump, Joe Biden, third party candidate. And that's exactly your point, right. Is that people are like,
it's sort of, you go to the restaurant, would you like the beef, the chicken, or do you want to hear the special?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll hear the special. I might not, but I might not order it.
Yeah. So it's all very, very speculative. I mean, there were a while back, it's mostly Democrats who are concerned about a no labels campaign, but I don't think the case is all that clear that a ticket would necessarily pull more from Biden than from Trump. It depends very much on the candidates, and we just don't have any really good polling on this sort of thing. A while back, Karl Rove wrote an opinion piece in fact, the Wall Street Journal, arguing that no, Republicans should be concerned about this. And so there's a lot that's up in the air. I don't know that it's a certainty that Joe Manchin is going to run. There are a lot of people who seem to think that, but we'll wait and see.
So I guess my thought on who would be more likely to cross over is I think it's easier for Democrats to maybe say, look, we want a guy who has been a Democrat, is a Democrat. Maybe we don't agree with him on everything, but he's not Trump.
Yeah. And so
and we're concerned that, and we don't think, and we think otherwise Trump will beat Biden.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. And so the person at the top of the ticket there, because the unity ticket that No Labels wants to run is going to be a two-party ticket. And so I would expect that if the Democrats at the top, that might be the case. But again, No Labels can only be a spoiler, just simply because they don't have the resources to run anywhere close to a 50-state campaign. It's not a stunt.
No, okay. I would tend to agree with you on that. You need the infrastructure.
Yeah, and the infrastructure, you can't be building that a year before the election. If there is a case to be made that this could work. Let's say, you remember back in 2020, Mike Bloomberg was a presidential candidate for a hot minute. Well, actually for around 4 months or something like that. He spent $1 billion. Well, if Mike Bloomberg were willing to put that $1 billion he spent on that sort of sad attempt to become president into a third party, and he got a few other folks to do that, and they were willing to wait 8, 10, 12 years and build something up, then maybe. But still the odds are stacked against it. But without that...
And there's a reason behind that, and that is that in most cases, third parties are sort of protest parties, right? They don't have sort of their own ideology coming out. So, for example, I'd say it's different, the Republican Party emerging from the Whig Party, right? There was something brand new. The dogmas of the past are insufficient for the whatever of today, as Lincoln said. And there was hey, we're different. We're not just protesting these guys. We're actually. So I think that's something. But yeah, so usually if you're protesting, it's more just like, I don't like this guy, or I don't like this. I'm mad about this one particular issue. Like for example, in Ross Perot, it was trade. but they don't stick around long enough to build a coherent party with that infrastructure.
Yeah, I think what's at least somewhat different potentially about this moment is that it's not issue-based, it's extremism-based, because we have a political system on both sides that tends to reward extremism in primaries and push those people up as the general election candidates that a lot of folks in the center are just not necessarily all that crazy about. And so that maybe shifts the dynamic some, but I don't think nearly enough for a party without literally billions of dollars in commitments, financial commitments to build would be able to do anything with.
Yeah. So I will say something that I may regret saying, but I'll say it because I'm confident that it will never happen. And that would be my advice to Joe Biden. If you want to assure yourself of victory, I would make Joe Manchin your vice president.
That would be an interesting. Now, wouldn't that be something?
No, again, I don't think it'll ever happen. You could do it. But for a bunch of reasons, but I think that ticket would be unbeatable.
I think that would be a really tough. I think you're right about that. But of course, for so many reasons, Joe Biden's base would not even consider letting him do that.
Well, I don't know. I think the base might come around in that if they say, "Listen, this is a surefire winner."
It would help, certainly.
We know Joe is unlikely to make it through a second term. I didn't think he'd make it through a first term. And the alternative is Trump. I get it. There would be a lot of people in the base who would be unhappy about doing that.
Right. I see what you're saying.
But
sure.
I think they still would. And I think there would be Republicans who would say, you know what? I can't stand Biden, but I'm okay with Joe Manchin. And you know what? I don't see Biden serving the whole thing. So we'll do this and no Trump and maybe we get a President Manchin. Now, again, I think that will never, ever happen. But I'm just saying.
Interesting piece of advice. All right.
Yes.
There we go. Let's move on to the elections this past week. Voters in, Ohio, Kentucky, Virginia. In Ohio, the focus was mainly on a proposal that would enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. Now, there was a second measure as well about the legalization of recreational marijuana. Both of those passed with comfortable margins. The abortion won by 13 points. The recreational marijuana won by 14 points. Then there was Kentucky, a deep red state. Incumbent Democratic Governor Andy Beshear beat his Republican challenger, State Attorney General Daniel Cameron, by 5 points. This is in a state that went to Donald Trump by 26 points in 2020. And then in Virginia's state legislative election, Democrats won a majority in their House of Delegates and maintained control of the state Senate, though the margin in both chambers is still very close. And Virginia's Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, he worked pretty hard to persuade voters to give his party a legislative majority, but obviously not enough of them were persuaded. So, Jay, I thought we'd start with our state, Ohio, where, by the way, I wanted to mention, I voted on Election Day in person for the first time in over a decade.
All right. That's the way it's meant to be, Mike.
Anyway, so let's begin.
And how was your experience? Did you have any issues?
I went.
Did anyone try to disenfranchise you or anything like that?
There were more poll workers than there were voters when I went. So they were like, come on in. Hey, how you doing? Come to me. It was kind of fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it. So there you go. I thought we'd start with issue one. That's the big one. It not only legalized abortion, but it put the right to an abortion in the state constitution. So a couple of things I'm wondering, Jay. Number one, if you were surprised at the result, particularly the margin of victory, given that Ohio, for folks who don't know, Ohio used to be a purple state. Now it's solidly red. Republicans control all statewide offices. They have something like 3-1 margins in both chambers of the state legislature. This is, I said, 13 points. That's pretty big. What do you think about that?
Maybe it's a little higher than I thought. I would have, if you had asked me, and I wasn't on the show the couple, I would have said it was likely to win by like 10 or so, right? So yeah, I guess it surprised me a little bit. Did it shock me? No. And I think there's a lot of reasons we can go into how it played out. I think the right to life folks, the no on issue one, folks did not run a good campaign. They did not run much of any campaign, at least in my parts. Now it could be Northeast Ohio, Cleveland. They may have just kind of conceded Cleveland and not really done anything. But I don't know if they did anything down in your neck of the woods,
$10 million.
which would have been more fertile ground.
Oh yeah, they spent $10 million. So I mean, it wasn't.
That's $10 million, but that's not going to get you anywhere.
But I guess here's what I wonder. That's not necessarily a bad argument, but as National Review pointed out this week, the pro-life side, they're now 0 for 7 in abortion referenda since Dobbs. And so this is not just a fluke, unless you want to believe these are somehow miraculously 7 really bad campaigns. It seems
no. And
okay.
you didn't let me finish, because I wasn't going to say that it's not entirely that, they ran a bad campaign. Part of it also, I would say, and again, I hesitate a little bit and feel bad about saying this, because I have friends in the Ohio Right to Life movement organization, and been big life supporters who I've known for years. But I would say there's an overall just botched strategy going back a decade or so, and this is something that you and I have talked about a number of times, and the problem of free votes and virtue signaling, in that the measure that became law in Ohio after Dobbs was decided was this so-called heartbeat bill, which essentially outlawed abortion after more or less 6 weeks. And there are a whole bunch of problems with the heartbeat bill. One being it's, again, there's variations on when, no one knows for sure when that, different people detect heartbeats different times and so forth. There could be heartbeat detected, in some cases before someone necessarily even knows they're pregnant. I mean, all sorts of issues there. But it was a thing of the Right to Life movement sort of ran on this. And interestingly, if you remember, Mike, Governor Kasich vetoed it.
Right. Governor DeWine signed it in 2019, but Kasich before. And another thing I'll mention on that is there were no exceptions for rape or incest in that one as well. And that's been a big sticking point.
And again, there was this sense of it is all just kind of virtue signaling, because it's, everyone knew, well, it's not really constitutional yet. It's not going to take effect. So there wasn't necessarily a vigorous debate on, are we serious about this? Because everyone knew they weren't. And it was just a matter of sometimes competing as to who could be the most pro-life. And that's what they ended up with. And the problem is now they had something that when they were called upon to actually defend it, they didn't have really great grounds to do so. I think there could have been so much more. And this also goes back to some of my involvement on that issue back when I worked for the legislature, is we had put together a late-term abortion bill. And, really we're pretty scrupulous in trying to say this is something that we want to be constitutional, right? We want to be able to, if this goes to the Supreme Court, be able to defend it and maybe win. Maybe this is the one that overturns Roe. Secondly, we wanted something that was politically defensible that you could win on. And I think we had that, right? It had the rape and incest exceptions. It had, it relied on the Casey viability language, but included the health was defined as serious impairment of bodily function. So it's not just a, so anyway, so maybe it's like a little personal pride of like, look, I would have done it differently. But to me, that's a big problem, right? They passed something that they were not going to be able to defend. And they couldn't.
And it's not like their base would let them all of a sudden pass a new measure of, say, 15 weeks with a rape and incest exception. Yeah. So they just got caught.
But if you look at, had they done something like 15 weeks, right? Mississippi, and you can have the argument of, listen, here all the polls show that, people support a right to abortion, but they don't support an unlimited right to abortion, and they think there ought to be a period after which it should be prohibited, with the exceptions for health, life of the mother, and rape and incest and so forth. And hey, most of Europe does 15 weeks, and God knows they're smart. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is that would be a lot more defensible than we had the heartbeat bill, which again, the whole heartbeat thing, it's a little gimmicky in and of itself, right? So
do you
that's sort of where I'm coming from on that, is that there were sort of strategic faults that were baked into this, a decade ago, and even after that, there was poor execution. So,
and now, of course,
I'm not sure good execution could have saved it, but I think it could have narrowed the margin.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And now, of course, Democrats seeing all this, they're trying to get abortion abortion initiatives on the ballot in as many states as they can. Ideally, in swing states, they're focusing particularly on Arizona and Nevada, thinking that this is going to be an issue that's going to, have down ticket or other effects, right? And Donald Trump, of course, just this summer, Donald Trump said, after 50 years of failure with nobody coming even close, I was able to kill Roe versus Wade. Much to the shock of everyone. Without me, there'd be no 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 15 weeks, or whatever. Without me, the pro-life movement would have just kept losing. And I think that's, you combine that with energizing voters on this issue, and that's the strongest Democratic issue right now, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I think there's going to be something that's going to play out differently in different states, depending on what their state laws are, what their state laws defaulted to after Dobbs. So I don't know. I think sometimes Arizona and Nevada, you could be in for more of an uphill battle. In some cases, if you have a lot of Hispanic voters who tend to be religious, tend to be Catholic, but tend to vote Democrat, they might see a fall off there that they might not expect.
There was.
So again, I say it's. So I'm just going to say I think it varies state to state. The other piece I would say is I don't think that. I think you can very, very easily make the argument that abortion is more popular than Joe Biden, which is sort of saying something.
I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that I would say that removing or reducing a woman's right to self-determination in her body is very unpopular.
Yeah. Well, I would say almost, I mean, again, this is just how you frame the question. And again, the pro-life side failed miserably. But if you can frame this as freedom, right? As, hey, we're getting rid of this ban, to stop the ban, right? That's a much bigger winner than arguing that, because again,
do you think this? Do you think this stays an issue? We have a listener with us today who's wondered, 50 to 100 years, are people even going to be arguing over this as a political issue? Kind of like with birth control used to be a hot issue back in the 50s and 60s, but now not so much. And my take on that is, that's
a lot of our consciousness implanted into cloned bodies and stuff by that time.
Well, so there's that too. Once the singularity comes, but no, I think this is fundamentally different, and because it's viewed by a good chunk of the American public as murder, I don't see that changing, and so I don't see this issue going away like some other social issues may have. Like, for instance, the marijuana issue is kind of going away, as we've seen in Ohio.
Well, I think that may be back in years to come.
Well, we'll talk about that in just a minute.
But that's another thing. I think there's also a lot of Democrats in the pro-choice movement now has the problem of they've chased the car and they've caught it. And I'm not sure what they do next, right? I mean, so it's great. They generated a great turnout for issue one. can you generate that same turnout for a Democratic presidential candidate next year?
Not if
I
it's
don't
Joe
know.
Biden.
I mean,
No,
yeah.
you want more than that. Yeah, ideally, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you have to say, remember how much fun it was last year? You know what I mean? That's sort of the, or you have to make some sort of argument of, oh, your rights are still at risk, and it's but nobody's going to really buy that, I don't think, right? When you do, you put this in the state constitution by that much of a margin, yeah.
And there are only so many states where you can do that allow you to bypass.
Right. And you can only do it once for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to move.
Unless, let's put it this way, unless the Right to Life crowd would do something so strategically stupid, so impossibly dumb, but yet still quite possible, and go and say, okay, let's have a do-over.
Yeah. Well, I want to move from the politics to the policy of it, because here's what I'm wondering, and I ask these questions, I think in good faith. If the concern of the pro-life movement is saving lives, which I think it is, I wonder if pushing for really strict restrictions on abortions that voters end up overturning, if that's the best way to get what they want. I mean, another way, I guess, of looking at it is, when we look at certain other issues, like, for instance, gun violence, a lot of Republicans say, you know what, we need to focus on root causes, not taking guns. And you can use, I think, the same logic applies to abortions. For instance, some stats. The abortion rate in Ohio has gone down considerably over the last couple of generations. In 1982, it was around 46,000. In 2020, it was around 20,000. And 60% of those abortions in 2020 were women between the ages of 20 to 29 who were unmarried. Not only that, but we know that unplanned pregnancy is by far the biggest reason women give for having an abortion. Also, that women who are at or below the poverty line, something like twice as likely to not use birth control than wealthier women. And poor women who are not trying to conceive are something like 3 times more likely to get pregnant. And if you put all that together, I think you can say, if your goal is to minimize abortions, then something like the $10 million that the Right to Life folks put into this clearly disastrously failed campaign, what kind of good things can you do to get women in situations so they don't have to make that horrible decision? I mean, for instance, like implants. There are these implants that you can put in your arm, good for like 3 years or something like that, around $1,000 a pop. Basically things like that. There are IUDs, other things as well that are sort of long-term things that if you fund programs that make that kind of birth control available to women at or below the poverty line, I wonder if you don't ultimately do more good than what they're doing now. And again, I really want to get your take on this.
Well, I would tend to agree with you on the diagnosis, but disagree on the prescription.
Okay.
And this is, I mean, we say this like all the time, and people have said it a lot of times before us, but politics is downstream from culture. And, let's win that war, as Clinton said, right? He wants abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. Then the pro-life should start focusing on the rare piece of it. I would say maybe, not, federally paid for implants or state paid for implants is the way to go necessarily. But there are, I know there were discussions among folks in the conservative movement about, now that Dobbs is over, maybe we tee up a different sort of pro-woman, pro-child agenda, right? Making sure that if you want to have your child, you have the resources to do it, healthy prenatal care, all that sort of thing. So it's sort of the other side of what you're suggesting. Yeah. But I would say most conservatives don't object to birth control. I might object a little bit to the government giving people implants. just at the idea at some point, sort of the a la Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, would say that at what point does the right to get an implant
Sure, it maybe
become
gets
a duty?
it gets into some kind of potentially.
At what point does the government start really suggesting that you ought not to reproduce? And that would, I think, is a problem. But no, I agree. I think it's at some point you do better by focusing elsewhere. Now the problem is, everyone has a constituency, and so there's this weird sort of thing of everyone's always trying to rack up the biggest, the legislative win. I mean, that's going to be the much bigger feather in the cap for someone than to just say, hey, over the last 5 years, abortions have declined by X percent. It's a lot tougher to get fundraising to keep running your organization when you're talking about, hey, we're making these changes that you can't necessarily assign to anything you're doing. It could be changes in demographic. For example, if the rate of abortion goes down, that could be related to things like changes in demographics, the economy, possibly availability of birth control. It could be related to religious attitudes. It could, all sorts of, a million different factors. So it's difficult to say if it goes up or down that, hey, now please give us money so we can continue our good work.
Okay, well, why don't we move on to issue 2, that marijuana issue? Now, Ohio is the 24th state to legalize recreational marijuana. And again, this won by even a larger margin than the abortion thing, 14 points. Jay, again, same question for you. Did this surprise you? Not just the win, but the wide margin?
This surprised me less. Surprised me less, but disappointed me more.
Okay, talk about that. Yeah, I want to hear this.
I mean, look, I think the experience in, I don't know, people from states like California, like Colorado, places like New York City can chime in with their thoughts, but I just don't think this is good public policy, and based on what's happened in a lot of these places, based on mental health outcomes. And I know everybody gets all mad if you ever suggest that weed might not be good for you. And also I'll take some hits from the libertarian crowd that on the one hand I should say, well, what do I care if somebody's going to smoke? But I think at some point it does start affecting things like the workforce, the ability to hire people, safety of driving, kids. So I understand, of course, kids can't get this, but they will. And you're going to move that back. And the idea of having gateway drugs, the mental health crisis that a lot of kids have been going through over the past couple of years. I mean, out of social media, pandemic, et cetera, you name it. I don't think this helps. I think it makes it worse.
But I wonder, I guess,
and also just I don't know, Mike, this is, and I'll tell you, this is my just aesthetic objection to it. It's just kind of a dirty, kind of sleazy kind of feeling. I don't know. I just, you know what I mean? If you've driven from Ohio, and it's not going to be like this anymore, but into Michigan, which I did a couple weeks ago, the first thing you see as you cross the border are all the billboards advertising the pot shops or Michigan where it's legal, all these things of free weed and so forth. It's just kind of unsightly. And
do you feel the same way about legalized gambling? I mean, I guess I'm wondering.
As a matter of fact,
I'm wondering how far your nanny statism extends in the social realm. I guess because that's what it is, right? I mean,
no. I would say this isn't so much nanny. Again, I'm if you're making like the aesthetic argument, right? And I would, I don't know. Again, the legalized gambling thing when there's just, and that's also enshrined in Ohio's Constitution. Which is troubling, but that's an issue for another day. no, I understand, right? The idea of there are vices out there, and people will partake of them. So you're better off regulating them, getting some tax revenue for them. But I kind of feel better sometimes if there's still, if not a wall, but sort of a fence you have to climb over a little bit to get to that vice.
But do you think that?
And again,
politics,
this is not a political argument at all. This is just my own sort of personal aesthetic argument.
You love to say, and I agree with you, that politics is downstream of culture. Then, do you think that these prohibitions should be put on an unwilling public by the state, or do you think that that's the job of the culture to do that? Because normally, I would expect you to say
I think it's better. I think it's better. It's more effective as it flows from the culture. And then I think you have the state then that can enforce some of it. Now, for example, I would argue that a lot of the penalties for marijuana use, possession, and so forth, criminal penalties are overdone, right? But let's put it this way: would you say, well, what about cocaine? Well, all right. What about heroin? Well, you know what I mean? I get that.
Sure, there's a risk.
At some point, you're going to say, yes, we do need a nanny state.
Yeah.
Because of the dangerousness of the substance or the thing you're talking about.
Yeah. No, I certainly agree with that. Well, one other thing on this, Jay, as you probably know, Ohio's one of only 19 states where citizens can actually bypass the legislature entirely and put measures on the ballot. And
that's the really big problem.
Well, and the thing is that now this is mostly a Western state thing. In fact, the only states east of the Mississippi that have this, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and Florida. And Florida, this is kind of difficult for reasons we won't get into. But I get the sense, Jay, that you're not really crazy about the whole initiative process in the first place, right?
I'm not crazy about the initiative process for constitutional amendments. I'm okay with the initiative process for statutes. And this grew out of the 1912 Ohio Constitution when progressivism was in full bloom. And so the Ohio Constitution does have these periods of you have an automatic referendum period of 90 days before a law goes into effect. There are exceptions, but that's the idea is so you've got 90 days to have a referendum and repeal it if you want. And quite honestly, I think that referendum always tends to make more sense to me than initiative, right? Because referendum, you're just saying, no, we don't like this. Initiative, you have people who are drafting the thing on their own and then trying to sell it. You don't always get what you want, what you think you're getting. But the big problem with Ohio is, it takes the same number of signatures, the same number of votes, et cetera, to pass a statute by initiative as it does a constitutional amendment.
Might as well do that.
Yeah, exactly. Why not the constitutional amendment? And thus the problem is the Ohio Constitution has become something of a Christmas tree for special interests, right? If you read through the Ohio Constitution, you get this. You start off with your various branches of government and your guaranteed rights and your freedom of speech and religion and guns and all that. And then you start getting into casinos and where they will be located and racetracks and where they'll be located and the size of the gaming tables. This is, in the Constitution. And then there's other things like victims' rights stuff, which, again, I'm all for victims' rights. But, this whole big section in the Constitution of enshrining that. And now we've got abortion and weed. The abortion one, at least, I think you can make the argument that, all right, maybe that belongs in the Constitution.
I mean, like fundamental rights sort of thing, if that's your position, sure. But casinos, no fundamental right to casinos. Off. Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
And again, so especially something with marijuana, which is something you would say, all right, if it's going to be legal, then there should be a regulation regime that's necessarily going to be more complex and complicated than what you've got. Again, the initiative tends to be sort of a blunt instrument. It allows those special interests to kind of hide whatever language they want in that.
But on the plus side, it allows for if you have an instance where the legislature is clearly not interested in what the majority of the population wants, it allows you to actually, and so I get your point about the legislative language and all that, but there can be, I think you would acknowledge, an advantage to going around an unresponsive legislature.
So, but what they did last time, Mike, and you would know this, but our listeners wouldn't. The initial marijuana regulation in Ohio, which had to do with gummies and CBD, and that is legal, not 100% legal. But the way that was handled was there was this threat of a referendum's coming. So the legislature moved and said, all right, we're going to allow these forms of marijuana, and we're going to allow medicinal marijuana up to a certain, here's this regulated. And then we have the whole big system of here's the number of licenses we're going to have for growers, and here's the number of licenses we're going to have for dispensaries. And it was this whole big process. And I'm,
it was a pain. I mean, I looked into getting my pot card, and it was just too much work. I just said, I don't need to get high that badly.
Too much work, man.
I'll get my drugs on the illegal market like everyone else, I guess.
But you know what I'm saying is on something like that, I do. I mean, think of it this way: what if we're in 1912 or something like that, and the automobile was just becoming popular, and someone, they pass that same year that they redid the Ohio Constitution. Let's have a constitutional right to your car. Well, wait a second. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes in there, right? That you would say, I don't need to go. I don't need no license plate. I don't need to see no BMV. It's in the Constitution, and I think that's the problem, right? With certain.
I agree with you on that. I think this stuff should be a statute and not constitutional amendment. So on that, we absolutely agree. Well, let's move off of Ohio and talk about that Kentucky.
I like talking about Ohio. See, I know a lot about Ohio.
I know you do, but let's move next door, right to the south, Kentucky. It seems strange, I think, to a lot of people that Republicans couldn't win a state that's so deeply red. And what do you think the problem was for your party here, Jay?
I don't know. I guess, but I would start by saying it wasn't really unexpected, was it? I mean, Bashir had a pretty significant lead.
Well, no,
in the polls going in.
I'll say this: it was thought it might be kind of close, but Bashir has been for a while now one of the most popular governors in the country, which is weird. A Democratic governor who squeaked through in his last election against an incredibly unpopular Republican, somehow becoming one of the most popular governors. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that Kentucky has a Republican supermajority in both chambers, so it's not like he can do anything or stop anything that Kentucky Republicans.
He's a nice enough guy, and
it seems okay.
It's pretty harmless as long as we've got the legislature.
Exactly. Part of it, I think, also is, and it does get on abortion again, because he really hit Cameron hard and Cameron was his opponent, on his stance on abortion. And again, I think Democrats recognize that this is a good issue for us until Republicans figure it out, and let's hope they don't.
Right. And Cameron, a statewide African-American Republican candidate in Kentucky.
So you think there might have been, it sounds like you're suggesting maybe a racism element there?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
You know Kentucky better than I do.
You raised it. That's why I asked. That's all.
I raised it simply because it's almost an anti-racism. I don't mean that in the Abraham X. Kendi way.
Gotcha.
But that look, the nominee of the Republican Party in a southern Kentucky wasn't technically a secessionist state. Had as their gubernatorial choice a black man, much like the Ohio Republican Party chose Ken Blackwell back in whatever it was, 2006, 2004, who went on to lose 2008, I guess, went on to lose disastrously. But I think that says something. I'm just making the point because I like to make the point when I can, that Republicans are so often accused of being racist, so forth. These are the people who come out of Republican parties, Republican primaries, with the most conservative, most active voters voting. So,
And finally,
now apparently the Democrats, I suppose, could have all voted racially. I also thought of, Mike, it's because we're doing this Friday afternoon, and I tend to be more awake and more caffeinated than I am when we do the Saturday morning ones. But that same year, it was Ken Blackwell and Josh Mandel also went down in big numbers, right, in Ohio. And I have to just always wonder if it had been the other way around, right, that they had been Democrats. Would the headline have been, voters reject Black Jewish candidates? But you didn't see that. But nevertheless, that's ancient history now.
There you go. Now moving to Virginia, I mean, there were I mention this because there have been some moderate Republicans, some Republican money folks who were thinking maybe Youngkin really does an amazing job here in Virginia and gets the legislature to become solidly Republican, and then we can convince him to make a late entry into the Republican race and save us from Donald Trump. And that always seemed a little far-fetched to me, but any thoughts on the Virginia race? Or Virginia results?
I think Virginia is more of, look, that was going to be an uphill slog to begin with, right? I mean, I'd say Virginia would be a blue state that is maybe trending purple now, right? So I think it's one of those that was going to be an uphill battle to begin with. From the inside baseball perspective, I know there have been criticisms of from Youngkin and Virginia Republicans about they had sought assistance from the National Republican Party kind of late in the election of can you get us a little bit more money and we can maybe flip a couple of these seats, and the answer was no. If you're a conspiracy, or the answer was deafening silence. If you're a conspiracy theorist along those lines, I mean, maybe that sort of fits also. But Virginia, it seems to me was, I think maybe the idea that they were going to take the legislature was a little over optimistic for Republicans, and I think it just kind of played out as it probably would. So, and that one didn't. Again, did a big surprise one way or another? No, not really, because I could see it going, and it is very close, razor thin there. So,
well, since I mentioned Youngkin as a presidential candidate, that won't happen. But there actually are some Republican presidential candidates not named Trump, and this last week they actually took part in a debate that I guess somebody watched on. This was Wednesday, November 8th in Miami, and I feel, I mean, we have a little bit of time left. I feel like we need to mention it as, a thing that happened. But to me, here's my take, Jay, an ever shrinking pool of increasingly desperate people trying to figure out some way to position themselves as an alternative to Donald Trump without alienating his base, except for Chris Christie, who's at least more comfortable.
His whole entire purpose is
but I mean,
alienating his base.
Yeah, but I mean, Trump's up over 40 points on DeSantis, who's in numbered second place, and he's up around 20 points on the entire Republican field combined. I mean, so I guess I ask Jay, Donald Trump has been saying cancel the rest of the debates. There's no point to this, and I got to say, I sort of see his point. What do you think?
No, I think there's a point to it in that, look, for the same reason that there's a point where the Democrats should have thought harder about their vice presidential choice last time out. Trump could get hit by a bus tomorrow, or he could actually, be found guilty and locked up. I understand the argument that he does better when he's being persecuted and prosecuted. The trouble is some of this stuff. For example, look, if I'm, and I've said this a number of times, I think this New York case is absolute nonsense. It's a victimless crime, and it's a fraud claim where no one was actually defrauded. And
where no one
brought
suffered
entirely
any damages. But yeah, I see your point. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's defrauded if you didn't, well, you tricked me into getting my entire investment back, so and it was brought for political reasons from the very start, right? The Attorney General said, I'm going to, part of her campaign promise was, I'm going to find something to prosecute Donald Trump over. Likewise, the Alvin Bragg one, right? I feel the same way about that. That's just really stretching it. But when you get to some of these other ones, I think it becomes a little tougher, right? The document case, I still don't think the January 6th case is particularly legally strong, but I do think it's politically more dangerous. The document case, I think, could be both. And I'm wondering, there's that 40%, but could it evaporate quickly? Could we need to have an understudy in short order?
Sure. Okay.
So I think that's why it's important to do this. It's also important for the purpose of defining what the party is going to be, who they're going to be, and people lining up for the post-Trump world.
Okay, that's reasonable.
Right? The idea is Trump the flash in the pan of this more nationalistic, isolationist. Although I wouldn't necessarily even describe Trump as isolationist compared to Ramaswamy, right?
Trump just wants to win. He's the candidate of winning.
Exactly.
So I'm tired of winning. You'll get tired of it.
Yeah. So, what's the future of the party going to look like? So I think these debates are important for that. And I would also say, I think in this case, unlike some of the other ones, I think there was a clear winner, and I think it was Nikki Haley.
Yeah, who is certainly emerging as a strong rival to DeSantis in that fallback position sort of thing. And you see a few other dynamics, like you can make a case that Tim Scott is trying to position himself as a Trump vice presidential choice, and maybe there's a possibility of that. Though I'll point out that Donald Trump last week said, hey, he was maybe even thinking about Tucker Carlson. He said, I like Tucker a lot, he's got great common sense. And I thought, well, I guess you're okay with him, hating you passionately so long as, anyway. But somehow I don't see.
Look, I think part of the reason, I don't want to say part of the reason, but Trump's victory in 2016 was, it wasn't a squeaker, but it wasn't a blowout by any means.
No, it was pretty close. Yeah, I mean, a couple, 20,000 or whatever votes one way or the other.
And I think for him to have done that, I think he needed Mike Pence on the ticket,
right,
to reasure your more traditional conservatives.
Yeah. So you don't think Tucker Carlson will reassure anyone, or?
I don't think Tucker Carlson would be reassuring.
No, not. Now, they might say, well, we got to make sure we take care of Trump, because if he goes, Tucker Carlson will be president. And oh, my God.
Right. Well, maybe that's the case. Be like on every night from the Oval Office, just do a show, right?
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up on that note. We still have a lot we really wanted to get into, like that New York Times Siena College poll that looks not good at all for Joe Biden. The censure of Representative Tlaib for her comments about the Israel-Hamas situation, that big Second Amendment case, and more. So we will get to that on the Supporters Midweek Show. And if you are a supporter, you will be getting that, Tuesday. We release it every Tuesday morning. And if you're not, you will get a preview. But if you want to get the whole thing, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. You don't get just that. You get ad-free episodes of everything we put out, that full-length midweek show, access to our Discord group where you can interact with us, even other stuff like we had a couple listeners who are joining us right now because they're supporters. That's something we offer as well. So if you want to find out more about any of that, patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us.
The behind-the-scenes experience.
There you go. Absolutely.
Which we didn't have quite as much this week.
But there is a little unfiltered
last time I had to take a phone call to defend freedom in the middle of the show. That was
exciting.
So.
Yeah, that Politics Guys unfiltered, I guess, and if you can handle it. So, but there's that. There's
this week, all the other defenders of freedom are at the Federal Society National Conference.
Well, that as they should be. So there's that.
So I'm stuck here, alone.
Oh well. Well, I'm glad you're stuck here with me.
Mine in the store.
Yeah, there you go. So. But also, folks, if you want to support us on Venmo, you can do that. We're at Politics Guys, or through PayPal. You can always find those links in our show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you want to get the full length midweek show, but you are not in a position to financially support us, send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will make sure you get that full length midweek show every week. And whether you support us or not financially, it helps us. It's a lot. It's a big deal if you can subscribe, rate us, review us on your podcast app, and share episodes on social media. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can do that through mail, regular old email. Sorry, not snail mail, but regular old email at mail@politicsguys.com, the Discord channel I already mentioned, as well as Facebook and X. And you'll find links to those in the show notes. And finally, as always, a very special thanks to our executive producers. They are a fantastic bunch, a fantastic brunch. They are not a brunch. They are a bunch. But I would have them for brunch. Anyway, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. Folks, come on over to my place for brunch. We'll set it up. It'll be wonderful. Anyway, we'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.